This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson Podcast. Here we go. All right, episode 5 of the Kosmographia Podcast with Randall Carlson. We also have Mike, the man of mystery, and Brad attending. Cosmo B.
I'm here.
And we are the Snake Bros.
That's right. Brothers of the Serpent, hosting and being the butt of jokes. So
Snake Bros.
That's right. Randall, where did we leave off last week? What are we doing here? Let's keep going. Let's figure out where Atlantis is.
Well, that's a mighty tall order, Russ.
Well,
deep stuff we're diving into on the first couple episodes. I mean, we're really hooking people here. This is powerful information they need to hear about. Hit it, right. Randall.
Well, if you recall, last episode we concluded with a discussion of the myth of Phaeton.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, we did.
Right. So now, one of the sources of information that we have on Plato comes from the Commentaries of Proclus on the Timaeus, which gives us an interesting little perspective, sort of expands upon the perspective that we got from the reading of Timaeus, Plato's account of referencing the myth of Phaeton, which is why we then shifted over and we looked at one of the accounts, of the fable of Phaeton from Bullfinch's mythology. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a brief reference from Proclus on his commentaries, the Commentaries of Proclus on Timaeus.
Okay.
All right. So this is what he says. This was translated from the Greek by Thomas Taylor back in 1820. And it would be interesting to see a more recent, but regretfully, there aren't a lot of translations of Proclus in English, but this one kind of does get to the point. So this is what Proclus was talking here when in his commentary on Timaeus, and in Timaeus, Plato's reference to the myth of Phaeton. The fable respecting Phaeton, however, requires a manifold discussion. For in the first place, it is necessary to consider it historically, in the second place, physically, and in the third place, philosophically. History, therefore, says that Phaeton was the offspring of the sun and of Clymene, the daughter of Ocean, and that, driving the chariot of his father, he deviated from the proper track. That Jupiter also, fearing for the safety of the universe, destroyed him by a thunderbolt. But he, being blasted by thunder, fell about Eridanus, the river. The fire, likewise, proceeding from him, burnt everything that was nourished by the earth. And his sisters, the Heliades, lamented his fall. And such is the historical account of the fable. It is, however, necessary to admit that a conflagration took place. For the whole narration is introduced for the sake of this, and also that the cause of it is neither an impossibility nor a certain thing, which may easily happen. But it will be impossible if one fancies that the sun at one time drives his own chariot, and at another time being changed ceases to drive it, and commits his proper employment to another. But it will be among the number of things which may be easily accomplished if it is supposed that this Phaeton was a comet, which, being dissolved, produced an intolerable dryness from vehement heat. For this supposition is generally adopted. Porphyry, therefore, says that certain signs may be assumed from the motion of comets. So what he's referring to there is very interesting, because we're getting a little peek into a tradition that actually existed in the post-Platonic world, the belief that Phaeton did represent, in fact, a comet. And as it says, as Plato said, a conflagration of things upon the earth happening after long intervals of time. And so we're introduced to these ideas right at the outset of the story of Atlantis, and therefore I don't think we can even proceed to hope to have any understanding of the narrative that follows without taking into consideration this prefatory material and these prefatory references to
right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So basically, since the old priest in Solon's account referenced the story, we looked into that, and so looking into Phaeton, and then you're pointing out that it's clear to some people, to some scholars, and even ancient people that the legend of Phaeton was about a cometary.
Yeah, the idea that yes, that this belief existed back in the classical world, that this myth referred to a comet, and Plato's pretty explicit about that when he says, well, it has the appearance of a myth, but it really represents the declination of the bodies revolving in the heavens about the earth,
right,
and a conflagration of things after a long interval of time. So he almost seems to be implying there that it's a regular occurrence, perhaps a cyclical occurrence.
Yeah.
See, so I think this is crucial to going further with this idea of Atlantis, and I think it's really interesting and important that this particular perspective is introduced right at the beginning of the narrative, given what we now know about things that might have happened back during that interval. Because as we also saw in the last episode, was that the dating of Atlantis and the war between the Proto-Athenians and the Atlanteans took place about 9,000 years before Solon's trip to Egypt, where he first received the tale from the elderly Egyptian priests. So given that particular date, which is repeated 3 times throughout the narratives, we can conclude that we're looking at around 11,600 years ago. But entirely independent of that, we have geology placing the end of the Younger-Dryas as the boundary and marker between the final termination of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene epochs. So the dating now for the date for the beginning of the Holocene is now usually given at 11,600 years ago, 11,600 BP.
Right.
Which coincides with the end of the Younger-Dryas and the beginning of the so-called pre-boreal climatic period, right? So you've got that. And then
so real quick, and this, tell me if this is off topic, but like the Comet Research Group and all of their work, they're looking at the beginning of the Younger-Dryas.
The beginning of the Younger-Dryas.
Right. So now we're looking at these myths that are pointing to the end of it also being
this particular myth, yes, pointing to the end of it. And we know, the other factor is Meltwater Pulse 1b. 1b, which is dated 11,600, which is a very large influx of glacial meltwater into the global oceans, and presumably a rise in sea level that would be quite rapid, in relative terms.
Yes.
And so it's interesting then that the timing of the Atlantis story places it right into a very auspicious geological period of time. And the events of rapidly rising sea level seems to complement the ideas introduced in the Atlantis tale.
Right. Also, the very quick removal of all that ice on the shelf, on the continental shelf, resulting in isostatic stuff.
Isostatic, which brings us to the isostatic stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff. So let's go ahead and introduce the concept then. I'm going to jump ahead and we will do a screen share.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay. I'll get this up so we can see an image. Good. That looks interesting. Okay.
Looks like you have 5 monitors you're looking at over there.
Oh, so you can see what I'm looking at?
Just the way your head's moving around, it looks like you got an enormous bank of monitors in front of you.
Well, yeah, basically I got a whole wall of monitors.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Freaking command centered over there.
No, but that's coming. That'll be here soon enough, right?
All right, good.
Okay, here we go. Share.
Ah,
Check this out. These are fossil shorelines next to Hudson Bay, which you can see up here in the upper left-hand corner. Post-glacial isostatic rebound. So, yeah, basically after the ice is unloaded, which you've had these, multi-trillion tons of ice bearing down, the land surface sinks. In this case, probably 1,000, 1,500 feet. I don't know if the exact amount. I haven't read the latest studies. The studies I've read go back 20 and 30 years. They're, basically still in the right ballpark. They've probably been refined, in the last decade, I have no doubt. But the point is that there's been a substantial uplift in the region where the glaciers existed, up to perhaps 2 kilometers thick, right? 1.5 miles, say roughly, thick of ice, which is gone. So the land is rebounding.
Hey, you got your microphones in your beard a little bit there, buddy.
Okay.
We
don't want the old microphone in the beard, do we? You know what I could do for next week is I'll shave a section right here.
Shave that section.
Just a little spot, a little circle right here where the microphone can go.
Make a nice crop circle out of it when you do that.
Do a sacred geometrical crop circle right there. Where the microphone can go.
All right, so you're seeing this, right? These are shorelines. So, and what you see here is a kind of a stepwise rebound. It's not a perfectly smooth process, but you'll also notice that the shorelines have a greater separation as you get to the older ones, because the land was rising faster. You see, so what is happening is the process is quite rapid early on, and then it slows down, but it's still happening. And who knows, it'll probably continue for several hundred or more feet before it's done.
Right.
Maybe a lot more than that.
So for people who are just listening, what we're looking at is Hudson Bay, and then there's all these strand lines that are all parallel with each other.
Yes.
And it looks like dozens and dozens of them. About how far apart were those in that picture, Randall? Like, what was do you know the distance between each one of those white lines that we were looking at, roughly?
I would have to this is just a guess, but I'm going to guess somewhere probably anywhere between 10 and 30 feet.
Okay, yeah. That's
something
amazing.
Like that. I guess now, we're going to need to determine that with more accuracy. So I guess can you get the helicopter pilot on?
That's right.
No, really, that'd be a very interesting trip to go up there and investigate that, wouldn't it?
It would.
So, see, there's... So
we know there was isostatic forces taking place, where the ice goes away, and we have all this evidence in various places that the crust is like rebounding upwards, and so we know that means that in other places it's sinking, like out in the ocean.
There's the point. Now, we do know... For example, we see isostatic rebound in Nevada going on, in Utah, that is a result of the unloading that resulted from the drainage and evaporation of Lake Bonneville, because the shorelines there are tilted because of differential isostatic adjustment. See, in other words, where the lake was deepest, right there, you're going to have more rebound, because there you're going to have more isostatic depression.
Right.
So then what happens is you've got the lake level there, but then when the ground rebounds, the shoreline that it left follows that, and it becomes convex upward.
See? I see.
And so that isostatic differentiation has been measured. I don't recall exactly what the numbers are, but it's pretty significant. Now, the thing you got to bear in mind, too, though, is we're looking like, in fact, up at Hudson Bay, that's the granitic core of North America. That's the craton there. So, the crust is very thick. Now, by contrast, oceanic crust is very thin. So the isostatic response to ocean loading and unloading may be more substantial than that of continents.
Right. And isn't there some places in the British Isles where rebounds are still happening as well?
Yeah, in Scandinavia, in British Columbia. Yeah.
Okay.
There's when you have the ice mass near the oceans, it basically what it does, let's see if I can show, like let's say this is the ground and here's the ocean. Right? Now here's the ice mass pushes this area down, but then it creates the glacial forebulge. See? That's the glacial forebulge.
Right.
Then the glacial unloading, the forebulge will do this. See, so there are considerable vertical movements in the Earth's crust. That's the point.
Right.
I think that's the main point here, that because what Plato describes is a subsidence of an island group. Now, we're basically starting from square one, which is Plato. We're not even going to think about, what all the accretion, all the
Right.
barnacles that have accreted to this story. See, the crystal technologies and the flying ships and all of the stuff, that goes on. People walking around with cell phones.
Yeah.
None of that. We're just going to go with Plato. Plato's version of it describes a maritime civilization.
Right.
Like I said before, something like a grand Phoenician or Minoan civilization.
Yes.
With colonies. Now, once you strip it back down to that, is that model really so implausible for a possibility of something that might have existed 12,000 years ago?
Right. Well,
See,
it's not to me, but I know that
but to Kyle, right?
Yeah, Kyle just is not having it.
He's not. He wants proof, right?
That's right. He's like, show me the potsherds.
Show me the potsherds.
That's right.
That was
Mark Lenner, I think, is
Well, no, he was. Okay, we'll save that because we do need to actually discuss that.
Okay, yeah.
We do need to discuss the Sphinx, and the erosion on the Sphinx at some point.
Right. Brad, take note.
For a future discussion.
That's right.
Okay, so listen to this now. I'm going to go dive into the into the actual science here, and see if what we find out is inconsistent with the possibility of an island group in the mid-Atlantic Ocean subsiding. Now, see, as I see the problem, there's two parts to it. Part one is what we addressed in the first discussion about this, the Atlantis fact or fiction, and the conclusion back in 1977 or 1978, whichever year it was, that the geology was inconsistent with Atlantis. The model of Atlantis that they used it was Ignatius Donnelly's 1882, 1881, 82, 83, 1883.
That's right. The congressman.
Right. And there was 11 propositions, wasn't it? Or 13 propositions.
13, I think, yeah.
13 of them, and two of them had geological implications. So the approach is that, well, if the two geological propositions are unproven or untrue, then the rest of it's irrelevant. We don't even need to look at it. We don't need to look at linguistic evidence or botanic evidence or zoological evidence or any of that, or geological evidence. We don't need to look at any of that if we say that the geology disproves the possibility that there could have been. But you see, remember, I called attention to the fact that the discussion was shifted conveniently from islands into a sunken continent.
Right.
The
straw man, right? They're building the straw man.
Right. We saw that. We saw how they were basically building this straw man. So let's stick back with Neros, the term that Plato used, which means basically island. An island. Nessos. I'm sorry. Yeah, Nessos. So then we'll get to the some of the science here that could be relative to this whole question. And so this is from past sea levels, Eustasy, and deformation of the Earth. It was written by R.I. Walcott in Quaternary Research, like I said, in 1972. So this is in some of these heady days, early days of first mapping out the ocean floor. When submarine technology was improving and they were able to go down and were doing a lot of dredging, they were beginning to take core samples. So they're learning a lot about the ocean floor. So he immediately starts by referring to a paper by Daly, D-A-L-Y, written way back in 1925. And let me define a term here, Eustasy. It's kind of a complementary term to Isostasy. Isostasy is up and down motion of the Earth's crust. Eustasy, spelled E-U-S-T-A-T, Eustacy, E-U-S-T-A-C-Y. Okay, vertical motion up and down of the ocean level.
Ah, okay.
Got it? So then if we talk about eustatic changes, we're talking about changes in ocean level. And the primary thing that, of course, affects changes in ocean level is the amount of glaciers on land. The more glaciers, the lower the ocean level. The fewer glaciers, the higher the ocean level. So there's when we talk about eustatic changes in ocean level, that's what we're talking about. Vertical motions of the Earth up and down, right? I mean, of the ocean up and down.
Right.
So this is what R.I. Walcott says. In a paper largely ignored in recent time, Daly, who wrote this in 1925, pointed out that changes in surface load over the oceans because of eustatic changes in sea level would deform the Earth. And according to Rodsky's 1889 calculations of the surface deformation of a homogeneous elastic sphere, this deformation would be of significant magnitude. And anybody who's interested in the actual references here, I'm happy to provide that. Rudsky goes back to 1889, and this was just simply calculations dealing with making assumptions about the elasticity of the Earth and then what happens when you impress various loads upon it, when you remove those loads, when you move the loads around. Okay, so he's referred to two papers here that are establishing sort of the bedrock basis of these ideas of vertical motions of the Earth's crust. So he goes on to say that in late glacial times, the major changes in load originated from the melting of ice over Fennoscandia and North America. Fennoscandia being northwestern Europe and named basically after Scandinavia. And the simultaneous worldwide rise from the released water. Because the surface loads involve the lateral transfer of mass over the surface of the Earth, right? So must material be able to move laterally at depth within the asthenosphere. And this is that zone of plasticity below the crust that the crust is riding upon. It's the zone, it's the cushion between the crust and the upper mantle, the asthenosphere, okay? The already complex picture of relative movements of sea level is further complicated by the ground movements due to post-glacial rebound itself. The material that flows into the deglaciated area to produce uplift must come from somewhere. So we would expect a complementary depression outside the zone of uplift.
Yeah.
If the whole mantle participated in the relaxation, these downward movements would be fairly widely spread over the Earth's surface, and therefore be of small and probably insignificant magnitude. But if, as we suppose here, the flow is restricted to a narrow asthenospheric shell, then the downwarp will occur in a restricted zone immediately peripheral to the uplift with large and significant displacements. Yeah. In Canada, the total amount of rebound at the center of uplift was between 400 and 1,000 meters.
Holy crap.
During the retreat of the ice sheet. Okay, so 1,000 meters, that's 3,280 feet.
Yeah, it's a kilometer, 1,000 meters.
It's a kilometer, 3,280 feet. Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot of uplift.
That's pretty wild right there.
Yeah, so because I've always wondered, like there's the talk of the glacier melts, so that water is flowing off into the ocean basins. Now we have this rebound, so that the area where the glacier was sitting on is coming back up. So you have areas in the ocean that's going down, but all the water's flowing into the ocean basin as well, pushing it down more. So when they talk about a sea level rise of 400 feet, that isn't actually giving you a good idea of actually how much water moved in there, because the ocean is dropping as the water's pouring in, and it still goes up 400 feet. So how much did it actually add? Like, in other words, if it didn't drop, would it have gone up 1,000 feet? You see what I'm saying? In other words, if there wasn't that rebound, how much higher would that water have made the ocean levels actually?
Well, that would be relative, because what's happening here is we're seeing in this dynamic Earth model is that we've got these vertical changes happening all over the place. See, so this is a really, it comes back down to the geoid, which is going to be this kind of average distance, and everything is moving and compensating, but of course always there's lags, right? Delayed response times. The response times, it's not necessarily a smooth relaxation or a smooth adjustment. It can be jolty, and probably did involve a lot of seismic adjustment. In fact, there's evidence that yes, there was major heavy-duty seismic activity going on during the deglaciation process. Also volcanism.
Right. It makes sense. I mean, you got that much movement happening on the crust. There's going to be it has to make enormous adjustments across all faults, basically.
Well, and you throw in the fact that down the middle of the Atlantic is the Mid-Atlantic Rift.
Right.
You've got two plates there that are going like this.
Yes.
So yeah, okay. So then this is actually from 3 years earlier. This is R.K. Matthews, who was also a renowned marine geologist and oceanographer. He wrote this back in 1969. It was published in Earth and Planetary Science Letters, Volume 5, pages 459 through 462, if anybody is interested. R.K. Matthews was with the Department of Geological Sciences, Brown University at Providence, Rhode Island, for a little bit of background on him. And he was an important figure in the evolution of our understanding about the oceans. And this is what he wrote back in 1969. The title of the article, Tectonic Implications of Glacio-Eustatic Sea Level Fluctuations. So glacio-eustatic, okay, so there's Eustasy, and obviously all he's doing with this hyphenated term is saying, connecting the glaciers with the eustatic changes in sea level. So he's saying glacio-eustatic, right? Just to make it clear that we're talking about changes in sea level resulting from changes in glacier mass.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Right.
The possible tectonic implications of glacio-eustatic sea level fluctuations have received only minor attention in connection with such problems as ocean floor spreading. The purpose of this report is to point out that late Pleistocene sea level data suggest that the ocean basins have responded isostatically and by a significant amount to the loading and unloading of water associated with Pleistocene glaciation. Bloom, which is another reference which I can provide to somebody who really wants to get into this, summarizes data which indicate that continents and continental margins respond isostatically to variations in load of 10 bars or less, which is not much. If such small loads on continents and continental margins can bring about isostatic adjustment, might we expect whole ocean basins to respond isostatically to similar small loads? End of quote. And I think the answer that we could now say here all these decades later is yes. A half a century later, we can answer that question and say, yes, they can. They can do that.
Right. And so he's asking, like, even a small load, we should expect the ocean basins to change. And we're looking at an enormous load.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we should expect huge shiftings of the ocean basins.
Yes. Well, but not necessarily uniformly distributed over the ocean basins. That's another important idea. So is there any actual evidence that there may have been a major isostatic adjustment of the mid-Atlantic region that could be consistent with the narrative of a subsidence of an island group? Well, okay, so this is along, so what do we do? We'll look at a couple of studies here that have been made along the mid-Atlantic ridge. And this is from 1975, going back. Again, Earth and Planetary Science Letters. The title of the author is Younger-Dryas and others. The title of the article is Mesozoic Limestone from the Vima Offset Zone, Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So he's referring to an earlier report where the lead author, along with another oceanographer, reported on a dredging of shallow water limestone from the summit of a ridge within the offset zone of the mid-Atlantic ridge. The limestone was reported to contain detrital grains of quartz, orthoclase, and microcline. So what's the significance of that? Well, that indicates that a nearby source of granitic detritus was available during its deposition. Bonatti and Honores have unsuccessfully attempted to explain their findings of granitic material and shallow water limestones on the basis of the present or recent geographical configuration of the equatorial Atlantic. So what that's saying is, what's interesting there is, granite is the rock that you find associated with continents. So what they're struggling with here is, why are they finding granite, detrital granite, along with shallow water limestones along the mid-Atlantic ridge? Why are they finding the remains of continents, in other words? So it goes on. Some of it gets kind of technical, and I'll try to skip over some of it just to not get it so technical here.
Is there an answer do you have a speculative answer of how we got granite detritus in the limestone? Or you go,
yeah. I mean, obviously it implies that there may be remnants of granitic crust or continental crust.
Okay, yeah, cool.
So Bonatti and Honores suggest that the limestone and its granitic mineral grains must have been deposited sometime during the Mesozoic, which is, the great era of middle life, the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, that ended 66 million years ago with the extinction of the dinosaurs, right? Soon after the opening of the Atlantic Rift within a narrow and shallow proto-Atlantic basin. If Bonatti and Honores' interpretation is correct, it would require that the crustal block capped by the limestone be left behind during the spreading of the Atlantic floor. This possibility would have important implications. So in other words, what he's suggesting there is that when the continents rifted and spread apart, there was a piece of continent left behind. You see, does that make sense?
Yes.
That a piece of a chunk of granitic continental type crust broke off, got disconnected from the. Now, was it part that became, Africa or Iberia, or was it part of North America? At this point, we don't know yet. But the idea now is that possibly there's a chunk of this granitic crust that has been left behind along the mid-Atlantic ridge.
When they first separated a long time ago, basically, is the idea.
Long time ago, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So he goes on to talk about the existence of this high magnesium calcite, which indicates this recrystallization process. I guess I won't get into that because it gets pretty technical. But what happens is that they can look at the oxygen isotope ratios and tell, did the crystallization take place underwater or did it take place in the atmosphere? So one of the things that they were dredging up there, along with the shallow water limestones and the granitic grains, was this material that had this high magnesium calcite. Well, this particular type of high magnesium calcite forms in the atmosphere. So what he says, it's a clear indication of subaerial recrystallization. So subaerial, just like submarine, below the water, subaerial means below the air, but in the air, right?
Right. Above the water.
Yes. The conclusions we derive from this study appear to confirm and extend the results previously by Bonatti and Honor as follows. The components of the limestone constitute a homogeneous assemblage characteristic of a shallow water carbonate platform depositional environment. The crustal block capped by the limestone must have undergone large vertical movements, including episodes of immersion. Now, two words: immersion, immersion. Immersion, to be immersed in the water, but immersion means to come out of the water. So the word is spelled E-M-E-R-S-I-O-N, not I-M. See, immersion. So he's saying there that this included episodes of immersion. So get what he's talking about here. You got to get the picture in your mind without getting into all the technical details. Anybody who's listening who wants to, all that information is available. But the point is you've got a chunk of continental type crust left behind. It's capped by limestone, right? It has shown evidence of large vertical movements, including the fact that crystallization in the limestones is consistent with actually coming up out of the ocean into the air, subaerial. That's why he used that term. If crustal spreading took place in this area, the block capped by the limestone apparently did not move with the spreading floor, but it has apparently undergone large-scale vertical movements. That's the takeaway from right. All of this.
And did they have any kind of a timeline on those vertical movements? I'm sure it's enormous.
No, they don't. In this, they just make the point that there have been large vertical movements.
Right.
You know, that's the takeaway. We have to go to other sources to try to find more evidence of timing here. Right. Let's see. So here now a follow-up article by E. Bonatti, Bonatti, if anybody wants to look him up, published a couple of years later in 1977. This is neogene crustal immersion and subsidence at the Romanche fracture zone, equatorial Atlantic. So at this point, their studies are near the equator, which puts them quite a bit south of where Plato's putative Atlantis would be, right? Okay. But the point is to establish the possibility, if not the plausibility, of large-scale vertical movements along the mid-Atlantic ridge. Okay, right. So according to plate tectonics theory, the motions of the lithospheric plates, and the lithosphere is just the crust, right? The rock. Lithos means rock, so the sphere of rock is lithosphere, right? According to plate tectonic theory, the motions of lithospheric plates between an accretionary boundary or a spreading center and a consumptive boundary, which is subductive, a subduction zone, are essentially horizontal, taking place on the outer shell of the globe. However, some exceptions to this model appear to obtain in the vicinity of the major oceanic fracture zones. which would make sense. Because here's where the crust is the thinnest on the planet. You've got that, the spreading center is going to be, you could almost think of that as a hinge line, right? If you're going to get vertical movements due to isostatic adjustments, that would be the place, that would be the zones of least resistance.
Yeah.
So the paper goes on to say, in this paper, we present an example of vertical tectonism of a transverse block located on the north side of the Romanche fracture zone. We demonstrate that the summit of this block was at or above sea level during the late Cenozoic. So the Cenozoic is the recent period of life. So late Cenozoic could mean anything from 10,000 years ago to a couple of 100,000 years ago. At this point, the time spread is too vast. But the point is that here is this evidence for this crustal block near the equator on the mid-Atlantic ridge that has undergone large-scale vertical movements up and down. And it demonstrates that this is possible, that this process is not some fantasy. It makes sense within the theory, the geophysical understanding of the way the Earth works. It's all consistent. And empirically, the evidence is beginning to accumulate.
Right, and that there's the chemical or molecular evidence that there was subaerial formation of some of that stuff in that block, right? So that's clear, at least that in that sense, that it was above the water for some time at some point, which means there has to be enormous vertical movements of that.
Yes,
yeah,
yes, like we're talking 1 to 2 miles.
Right, that's
we're talking 1 to 2 miles here. Let me go back. I'm going to do a screen share again. Take a good look at that. You see the mid-Atlantic ridge now?
Oh, yeah.
Going up. Look at this coming down, winding around like this. Now, we've got another huge fault line coming across here. So what you actually have here is a triple plate junction right here that trisects the Azores Plateau, which is this feature right here, which is a prominence. You see how it's uplifted from the rest of the floor around it, right here.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah,
that's clear.
Yeah, so you not only have the mid-Atlantic ridge there. You've got this plate. You've got 2 plates here, this European plate and this African plate that meet this. You've actually got a triple junction there. So that would make that particular zone even more susceptible to isostatic movements due to eustatic changes in the Earth's crust. Now, notice the transverse faults. You see these vertical lines that it run roughly perpendicular to the ridge?
Yep.
Okay. Now, I'm going to stop share and let's go back to what the boys were saying here in the so Bonatti called attention to the significance of prominent east-west transverse ridges. These are what we were just looking at. Some shown already by Heesen and others, which run parallel to the equatorial Atlantic fracture zones. It has been suggested that such transverse morphology associated with fracture zones could not have been produced solely by crustal spreading from axial segments of the mid-Atlantic ridge, but that vertical tectonic motions exceeding, important word, exceeding those predicted by the simple plate tectonic model must have operated.
Mm-hmm. So those horizontal lines they're basically claiming that, or saying that there's evidence of those horizontal lines are evidence of enormous vertical movement.
Think of those lines as Earth stretch marks.
Right. They can't be made by the plate tectonics model of it moving in a horizontal plane. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So
I'd seen those. I always thought that they were they were an artifact of the spreading, but these guys are saying that can't be right. It has to be vertical movements.
It's vertical movements.
They're fractures, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you had that motion up and down, you can imagine it cracking on the edges.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what you can imagine, and that's exactly what you see there. So.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So
awesome. Let's go on with one more to conclude this report from 1977. Partly phosphatized oolitic biogenic limestones. Get that?
Oolitic. Got it.
You got it. Okay.
Phosphatized oolitic. Yeah.
Oolitic. Well, it's not important. Anybody can look this up. But here's what's important about that particular kind of limestones. They were recovered from 950 to 1,300 meters below sea level, and 1,300 meters would be 4,264 feet. Were recovered from two sites near the crest of a transverse ridge. Some of the biogenic constituents of the limestones, their paleofacies assemblage, and the presence of well-developed oolitic facies indicate that, and here's the important part, the limestones formed in very shallow water close to sea level. In addition, several features of this limestone suggest that the summit of the transverse ridge might have undergone episodes of immersion. In other words, it may have come up so much that it actually came above the surface of the ocean. And now it's found 4,264 feet below.
Oh my gosh.
So this is what the science was even telling us back in the 1970s when these clowns were saying that there's no geological evidence that anything like that could have ever existed.
Huh.
Yeah. Pretty interesting, huh?
Yeah. So how could they make that claim and then just have and just like hope that no one was going to be like, well, look at these studies from 1972, 1974. Like, was it being accepted because because the scientific community just wanted to accept that there was no Atlantis, that the Atlantis thing was wrong? They're like, yeah, these guys.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, who read Atlantis back then? You had classical scholars who were students of Plato who found it just simple to assume that it was all metaphorical. Yeah. And that's how it was usually interpreted by modern 20th century scholarship, Plato, that all of that was metaphorical, okay, right, allegorical, that he was depicting his idealized model of the his political model of the state.
Right, the republic.
Exactly. So that was sort of the dominant thinking there amongst classical scholars. And then what you see in the Atlantis Fact and Fiction, that was sort of the definitive statement from the geological community at that time. And I don't recall that any of the people that I was quoting from here were part of that compilation. Right. But I think they found it easier not to rock the boat by coming out, these guys are getting funding and,
okay. Yeah.
It's like, it's always this, fear of being labeled a crackpot, a crank, right, pseudoscience. Right. So, nobody went, and, even by that time, there was a lot of things that was, Atlantean stuff that's, coming out, Edgar Casey. So there was that association, with psychics and Atlantis. And so even by the 70s, the whole notion of Atlantis was becoming adulterated with a lot of this other stuff. And that is not to say that all of the other stuff had no validity. It's just to say that the reality of Atlantis doesn't depend on any of that stuff. It simply depends on the consistency of Plato's narrative and the plausibility of the details that he provides, the wealth of details that he does provide in those two dialogues. See, so far what we're doing is we're going through it, we're taking that, and we're really breaking it down, and we're looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. We've looked at from Plato. We've done an analysis of some parts of the two dialogues, And then now we've segued over to looking from a more scientific perspective. And do the two complement each other? And at this point, we've seen nothing from the scientific realm to contradict the possibility that there may have been large vertical movements of the Earth's crust in the exact region where Plato is pointing to.
Yes.
Fantastic.
All right. So we're up on time here, Randall. So what do you think we're going to do next week? What's the preview of the material we're going to dive into on the next?
Well, why don't we do a concluding episode on Atlantis?
Okay.
And then what we'll do is we'll have a set of podcasts dealing with that particular issue that can then be used for example, if we organize an Atlantis tour sometime in the next year or two, we can use this material specifically as preparatory material. Anybody who is going to go here, you conveniently packaged for you are 4 or 5 episodes.
Oh yes.
Watch these so you can start to begin to get the science behind it.
Right.
But I mean, we haven't really delved in. We're maybe 10% of the way into the Atlantis material. So, you know.
So why are you saying we're concluding on the next episode? Let's keep going.
Well, because there are other things too that we probably need to get onto. I mean, we need to be talking about the Younger-Dryas comet impact. That's going to be an important thing. And catching up with some of that stuff. And
absolutely.
We need to talk about
it on a later date.
We'll come back to Atlantis, yeah, because I'm not going to let you just say, oh yeah, we'll finish it up, even though we've only done 10% of the material. That's not acceptable. That is not acceptable, sir.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. People can get a hold of us, send us questions or comments about the podcast. Kosmographia1618@gmail.com. Kosmographia is spelled with a K. Also, the website is kosmographia.com. That is the blog where all the podcast stuff is posted. It is not complete yet, but that is the address. You will be able to comment there. You can follow us on Twitter at Kosmographia. Okay. And Randall does not run that Twitter account, but Randall's stuff will be going through that Twitter account. So if you're talking to us on Twitter there, you're talking to the team. And we'll forward things to Randall or whatever, but he isn't actually getting it on his phone because he just doesn't deal with that stuff. Right, Randall?
You don't tweet?
Randall does not do the Twitter thing.
I have actually never tweeted.
Yeah. So
at least
the truth is out.
Not in the modern definition of the term.
All right. Well, I think that's it. That's it for today, man. Yeah.
Look, we put Mike to sleep.
Yeah, he's snoring back there.
Man, that 10% is pretty damn powerful.
Yeah.
I want the next 10.
Yeah. All right,
Lots
guys.
of places to go.
I'm not asleep. My eyes are half closed because I don't have my glasses on.
Okay.
Squinting.
It's okay, Mike.
It's a squint. It's not sleeping.
Kick ass, Randall.
A squint.
Thanks, Brad.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Gentlemen, good night.
Right.
Until next
Stay
time.
gross.
Thanks, everyone.